There was a moment in the late 90s where PlayStation action games split kids down the middle. Not by console, not by genre. On one side, you had Metal Gear Solid, slow, cinematic, deliberate. On the other side, you had Syphon Filter, loud, relentless, and constantly trying to kill you. And depending on which one grabbed you first, that decided everything. Because Syphon Filter didn't ask you to think like a spy, it asked you to survive an ambush. No gentle introduction, no easing you in, no tutorial pretending things were going to be okay. The first level throws you in the street full of enemies, bullets flying, nowhere safe to stand, and quietly says, work it out. And if you didn't, you died. A lot. For a PS1 kid coming straight from Super Nintendo, no mouse, no analog muscle memory, no FPS training in Doom. That was terrifying. But it was also electric, because Syphon Filter didn't pause for cutscenes. It didn't stop the action to explain itself. It didn't care if you were ready. It just kept moving forward. Level after level, situation after situation, always escalating. And for a certain kind of PS1 kid, the kind who wanted momentum, pressure, and constant danger, this felt like the most action-packed game they'd ever played. I remember arguments about it, real ones. Metal Gear Solid was better, everyone knew it. Better story, better presentation, more revolutionary. But Syphon Filter never slowed down. While Metal Gear Solid stopped to talk, Syphon Filter pushed you into another firefight. While Snake waited for the codec call, Gabe Logan was already running, already shooting, already panicking. And as wild as it sounds now, there were kids, my brother included, who genuinely argued Syphon Filter was the better action game on the PlayStation. Not smarter, not deeper, just faster, meaner, more immediate. And the craziest part, at the time, they weren't wrong. This wasn't a one-off either. Syphon Filter didn't just arrive, it kept coming. 3 full games on the PlayStation 1, released quickly, familiar controls, same pressure, same pace. While Metal Gear disappeared into development hell waiting for the PlayStation 2, Syphon Filter stayed right there in the 90s, loud, unapologetic, and very much alive. But history didn't remember them equally. Metal Gear aged like fine wine, Syphon Filter aged like a muscle memory. The aiming feels clunky now, the precision it demanded feels harsh. The presentation never caught up to the cinematic shift gaming was about to make. And yeah, when I went back, properly went back, something surprising happened. It still worked. The pressure, the difficulty, the constant forward motion, it was tough but just right. So this episode isn't about deciding which game was better. The argument was settled years ago. This is about remembering what Syphon Filter actually was, why it mattered, why it felt so intense, and why, for a certain kind of PS1 kid, it defined action, even if history eventually moved past it. Welcome back to the PSX Index. I'm Parasine, and this is the Syphon Filter Trilogy, the action games that never stop running. Here's something that's easy to forget now, but mattered a lot at the time. Syphon Filter did not care that you were new to 3D aiming. It didn't care that this was your first analog stick. It didn't care that your hands were still wired for a D-pad and 2 buttons. It didn't care that the last aiming you'd done was throwing fireballs in a straight line. Syphon Filter assumed you would adapt, or fail, and for a lot of us, that adaptation was painful. There's no lock-on safety net here. No generous auto-aim pretending you're better than you are. Enemies don't politely wait their turn. They flank, they rush, and they wear flak jackets. Which means something clicks very quickly. Body shots don't work. If you want to survive, you have to aim properly. Headshots, controlled bursts and positioning. And on a PlayStation controller in the late 90s, that was not second nature. This wasn't Doom on PC. This was a thumb on plastic, learning depth perception in real time, while bullets came in from angles you weren't prepared for. And Syphon Filter never slowed down to help you. The first game throws you straight into the urban chaos. Streets, rooftops, tight corridors with enemies who hit hard and don't forgive mistakes. You peek out for too long, you're dead. Headshot, you panic fire, you're dead. You stand still, absolutely dead. It felt brutal. but it also felt fair, because every death taught you something. You learn quickly that movement matters more than aggression, cover is temporary, headshots aren't optional, and panic is punished immediately. That learning curve is steep, but it's honest. The game isn't cheating, it's demanding, and once it clicks, something strange happens. You stop fighting the controls. Your thumb starts making micro adjustments without thinking. You line up shots instinctively. You learn how long you can expose yourself before retreating. The clunkiness doesn't disappear, but it becomes part of the rhythm. That's the moment Syphon Filter grabs you, because now you're not just reacting, you're surviving on skill you didn't know you had. This is where the comparison to Metal Gear Solid really sharpens. Metal Gear gives you a laser sight. It encourages patience. You wait, you line up, you execute. Syphon Filter throws you into chaos and says, sort it out. The aiming system isn't elegant, but it's demanding in a way that creates tension constantly. Every encounter feels like it could spiral. Every missed shot has consequences. And that's why the action never feels dull. There's no long stretch of nothing happening, no backtracking, no filler corridors designed to calm you down. It's always forward, always escalating, and when the game shifts into stealth, which it does often, it becomes even more punishing. Get spotted, the level doesn't gently recover, it erupts. Enemies pour in, positions collapse. Suddenly, you're fighting your way out of a mistake you couldn't do, or it's just a completely automatic game over. That pressure is what made Syphon Filter feel so intense at the time. It wasn't cinematic, it was elegant, it was stressful, but in a way that felt earned. For a PS1 kid still learning how 3D space worked, Syphon Filter wasn't just an action game, it was a crash course. And you either passed, or you restarted the checkpoint and tried again, heart racing, hands sweating, already knowing exactly what you've done wrong. That kind of learning sticks, and it's why, even now, clunky aiming and all, the tension still holds. Because Syphon Filter didn't build its action on spectacle, it built it on pressure, and once you felt that, you don't forget it.
Sorry, Logan. If it were up to me, I'd let you live. Agency orders.
Sure you would.
There's a sound every Syphon Filter fan remembers. That sharp crackle, a brief scream, and then silence. The Taser. It's impossible to talk about the series without talking about that weapon. Not because it's realistic, but because it perfectly represents what Syphon Filter thought action games should feel like. Immediate, punishing, a little bit cruel. The Taser isn't subtle. It isn't balanced in a modern sense. It doesn't care about dignity. You hit someone with it and you hold the trigger, and the game lets you do something video games probably shouldn't have let you done at the time. And as a kid in the 90s, that felt powerful. Not because it was edgy, but because after being punished for every mistake, Syphon Filter finally gives you a tool that lets you flip the pressure back onto the enemy. For once, they panic, and that moment says everything about the series' design philosophy. Syphon Filter is constantly oscillating between you being hunted and you being dangerous. There's no long build-up to empowerment, no RPG curve where you slowly become unstoppable. You earn control moment to moment. That's why the piece never lets up. Levels are built to keep you moving forward, objectives are clear, areas are tight. You're not wandering around wondering what to do next. You're reacting, run, clear a room and move on. And this is where Syphon Filter separates itself not just from Metal Gear Solid, but from a lot of PS1 action games in general. There's almost no backtracking. The game doesn't ask you to retrace your steps to pad the time. It doesn't slow you down with key hunts or circuitous layouts. Every level feels like a contained scenario. Infiltrate, survive, and escape. Then it pushes you forward into the next one. That forward momentum is relentless. Even when the game does slow down, a stealth section, a careful approach, it feels tense rather than calm, because the cost of failure is an immediate escalation. You're never allowed to relax into the stealth. You're always one mistake away from chaos. And that's why Syphon Filter are played so well. You don't remember exact routes or solutions the way you do in Metal Gear. You remember situations. That rooftop was brutal. That corridor always went wrong. That bit with the armoured enemies was panic. The action sticks because it's experimental, not scripted. Metal Gear Solid is iconic because of its moments. Cutscenes, bosses, conversations. Syphon Filter is memorable because of how it felt to play. Sweaty palms, rushed decisions, That constant sense that things could unravel at any second, and the Trilogy keeps that identity intact. Each game refines the formula without reinventing it. Familiar controls, familiar pressure, familiar rhythm. That familiarity mattered. You didn't need to relearn Syphon Filter, you just needed to survive it again. Which brings us to the moment the series truly peaked, because if the first game established the pace, Syphon Filter 2 perfected it. And this is where everything, the action, the variety, the pressure, finally came together.
Kowalski, grab the C4.
Yes, sir.
Grab the transponder's locator. We'll need it.
Got it.
Come on, move it. Jump. Keep moving. Go, go, go. Teresa, I'm not going to need your landing strip after all. Coming down the hard way.
If the first Syphon Filter proved the idea worked, Syphon Filter 2 is where the series fully understood itself. This is the one that people remember fondly, not just intensely, because everything that was rough in the first game gets tightened without losing momentum. The controls don't just suddenly become elegant, but they become familiar. The aiming still demands precision, but now it feels expected rather than hostile. The game stops teaching you how to survive and starts testing whether you're actually learned. And the biggest improvement, variety. Syphon Filter 2 never lets you settle into a rhythm for too long. One moment you're navigating tight indoor spaces, carefully managing sightlines. The next, you're in an open environment where positioning matters more than cover. Then suddenly, you're dealing with timed objectives, pressure-based scenarios, or enemies that completely change how you approach a fight. That constant shift keeps the pace sharp. You're always adapting, but never relearning. And that balance is incredibly hard to get right. The level design deserves real credit here. The return to the exhibition centre from the first game is a perfect example. It's familiar, but altered. You know the space, you remember how it felt, but now it's harder, more hostile, more demanding. That callback does something very clever psychologically. It reminds you how far you've come, then immediately tests whether you deserve that confidence. And then there's the train level. If you've played Syphon Filter 2, you remember it. Tight corridors, limited room to manoeuvre, constant forward pressure. There's no place to breathe, no safe zone. It's pure Syphon Filter design distilled into one scenario: move forward or fail. Enemy design also hits its stride here. Armoured enemies force position. You can't brute force encounters anymore. You have to pick shots carefully, manage distance, and control the fight. And when things go wrong, which they will, the game doesn't soften the blow, it doubles down. But here's why Syphon Filter 2 works so well. Even at its hardest, it feels intentional. You don't ever feel cheated. You feel outplayed, which makes retrying addictive rather than exhausting. The pacing across the whole game is remarkably confident. There's no sense of filler, no feeling that the level exists just to stretch runtime. Each scenario escalates the stakes, narratively and mechanically, without ever pausing the forward motion that defines the series. Even the story, which was never Syphon Filter's main selling point, feels more assured here. It's still pulpy, still exaggerated, still very much a 90s action thriller, but it doesn't get in the way. It exists just to justify movement, not interrupt it. Syphon Filter 2 stands as the peak, not because it reinvented the series, but because it perfected it. Everything Syphon Filter wanted to be, fast, tense, demanding, relentlessly forward, is right here, firing on all cylinders. It's the moment where the balance between action and control finally locks in, which makes what comes next a little harder to watch. Because by the time Syphon Filter 3 arrives, something in the air has changed, and not just inside the series.
What people will do for a little entertainment system.
It's midnight.
I'm here for the PlayStation 2. The best entertainment system to hit the world. It's gonna be great.
By the time Syphon Filter 3 arrived, the world had shifted, not dramatically and not overnight, but enough that you could feel it. The PlayStation 2 was looming, trailers were getting bigger, expectations were changing, and suddenly, Syphon Filter, once relentless, once cutting edge, felt like it was standing still. That's not to say Syphon Filter 3 is bad, it isn't. It's still competent, still playable, still recognisably Syphon Filter, but it no longer feels urgent. One of the first things you notice is the presentation, where the first two games shared a clear visual identity, chunky, consistent and confident in their limitations. Syphon Filter 3 tries to adjust, character models change, detail shifts. Something about the proportions feel off. It's subtle but noticeable. Instead of refinement, it feels like experimentation without direction, and you'll notice it. And once you notice it, it's hard to unsee. The level design takes a bigger hit. Where Syphon Filter and especially Syphon Filter 2 thrived on forward momentum, Syphon Filter 3 starts to stall. More contained environments, more warehouse-style spaces, more objective-based tasks. Defuse this many bombs, eliminate this many enemies, hold this area. You're no longer moving through the world in the same way, you're being placed into it. And that change matters, because Syphon Filter's greatest strength was always its pace. The feeling that you were being pushed forward by events, not ticking boxes on a list. Here, that pressure softens. The action is still there, but it's less kinetic, less frantic, more procedural. Even if the stakes feel different, Syphon Filter 3 doesn't escalate so much as it extends. It asks you to do more, not necessarily harder, and that distinction is important. Playing it as a kid, I didn't even finish it. By that point, my attention had shifted. The PS2 was arriving, Metal Gear Solid 2 trailers were rewriting what action games could look like. Syphon Filter 3 suddenly felt like it belonged to a generation that was quietly ending. Which is unfair in one sense, but unavoidable in another. Going back to it years later, finally finishing it through PlayStation Plus with trophy support, felt strangely personal, like ticking off something I'd left unfinished for decades. And in that context, Syphon Filter 3 makes more sense. It felt like a game made quickly, trying to hold relevance while the ground shifted beneath it. It doesn't disgrace the series, but it doesn't elevate it either. It exists as a closing note rather than a climax, and that's okay, because not every trilogy ends with a masterpiece. Sometimes it just ends, quietly, respectfully, still standing, but no longer leading. And when you look at the Syphon Filter trilogy as a whole, that arc feels honest. A series that exploded into relevance, peaked through refinement, and faded as the industry moved on. Not forgotten, just overtaken, which makes revisiting it now, with distance, patience, and hindsight, far more rewarding than trying to force it into a legend it never claimed to be.
She gave her life for mine. How can I live with that?
The same way I will. By surviving, by not giving up, by fighting for what you believe in. It's not over yet.
Looking back now, with everything we know about how games evolved, it's easy to reduce Syphon Filter to a footnote. The one that wasn't Metal Gear, the clunky aiming one, the Taser one, the graphics that weren't as good as all the other games that were coming out around the time. But that misses the point. Syphon Filter wasn't trying to redefine the medium. It wasn't interested in cinematic legacy. It wasn't building mythology. It was doing something far more immediate. It was asking one simple question: how much pressure can we put on the player, and how long can they hold it? And for a while, especially on the PlayStation 1, the answer was quite a lot. Syphon Filter mattered because it understood its moment. This was an era where action games were still figuring out what 3D actually meant, where developers were experimenting with space, perspective and control, often badly. Syphon Filter didn't overthink that transition. It didn't chase elegance. It didn't chase spectacle. It chased momentum. Every design decision fed into that. The lack of difficulty options, the unforgiving enemies, the demand for headshots, the refusal to slow down. You were always reacting, always adapting, always one mistake away from chaos. And that intensity carved itself into memory. For a certain kind of PS1 player, especially those coming straight from 2D games, Syphon Filter was baptism by fire. It taught you how to aim in 3D, how to manage space under pressure, how to survive without hand-holding, not gently, not politely, but effectively. And that's why the series still resonates even now. Not because it aged perfectly, it didn't. Not because it stayed relevant, it couldn't. But because it captured a very specific feeling of the late 90s. A time where action games weren't sure what they were yet, when experimentation came with sharp edges, when success meant holding it together under stress. Metal Gear Solid became legendary because it slowed everything down and invented reflection. Syphon Filter became memorable because it never gave you that luxury. It kept running, it kept pushing, it kept demanding. And even when history moved past it, even when presentation evolved, controls refined and expectations shifted, that core identity never disappeared. You can still feel it when you play it now. The tension, the urgency, the sense that the game is always slightly ahead of you. That's not accident, that's design. And it's why Syphon Filter deserves to be remembered not as a lesser rival, but as its own thing. An action series that defined a certain kind of PlayStation childhood, even if the industry eventually chose a different path.
My first job is rebuilding from the ground up, with people I trust.
Great. Just what we need, a bunch of raw recruits to train.
How about you, Teresa? Looking for a job?
No thanks. I'm heading back to the desert for some R&R. Besides, the Syphon Filter operation is finally dead. You don't need me.
Interpol has tracked down the last of the Project Coven sites. They've all been abandoned or destroyed.
Syphon Filter is destroyed, but Mara's out there somewhere.
Where to begin?
The same place we always begin, by looking for the truth and eliminating anything that tries to stop us.
Syphon Filter didn't need to change the world to matter. It didn't need to be the smartest. It didn't need to be the biggest cutscenes. It didn't need to age perfectly. It just needed to do one thing well, and it did. For 3 games on the PlayStation 1, Syphon Filter asked players to move forward under pressure, to adapt, to aim properly, to survive situations that didn't wait for you to be ready. It trusted you to learn the hard way. Sometimes that meant frustration, sometimes that meant panic, sometimes that meant restarting a checkpoint knowing exactly what you'd done wrong, but it also meant momentum. No backtracking, no filler, no standing still. Just action that kept you pushing, even when the industry around you started to slow down. Metal Gear Solid became a legend because it taught us how to stop and think. Syphon Filter became memorable because it never let you. And even now, clunky aiming, rough edges and all, that identity still holds. 3 games, 1 relentless pace, a series that defined a very specific kind of PlayStation childhood, even if history eventually moved past it. Index entries 32 to 34 are complete. That brings us to 34 games down in the PSX index, 1,244 to go. And after all that pressure, after all that precision, after all that forward motion, the index doesn't go bigger, it goes older. Back to the reason I wanted a PlayStation in the first place. Back to the playground myths. Back to the impossible characters. Back to the moment I realised games could feel forbidden. Next time, Mortal Kombat Trilogy. This has been Parasite. I'll see you in the Netherrealm.